Today's edition is quite unique, as usual, for the obvious reason, as you see. We are changing the line of discourse or conversation. Last week, it was about documentation, African music, its role in scholarship. This week, it's about creative process, storytelling, through the medium of orchestra. I'm sure some of us will ask, why medium, why storytelling, why this? Yeah, of course, I'm going to leave that for our guest today to explore that with us. And I'm sure by the time we are done, or before we are done with this conversation, you will see the essence of this conversation and why we need to have this kind of, exploration together. Otherwise, I'm happy to welcome our guest today, our presenter, Maestro Seun Owoaje. Of course, as you know, our guest for today, Mr. Owoaje, has been around for a while for many of us who are familiar with his work. And his work are also across the space with different forms of engagement. You know about his piano compositions, his choral work, and also the focus of today, which is the orchestral composition. And today's conversation is quite important because it's also built on initial or some of our ongoing conversation. I'm sure some of you remember recently we discussed the development of orchestral music, orchestra and orchestral compositions in the Nigerian context. And as part of that conversation, we promised that issues around new approaches and emerging ideas came up. And we promised that we are going to invite some of the composers, particularly Mr. Owoaje, whose work was, mentioned throughout that presentation. So today is the day. We are happy to let you know that Mr. Seun Owoaje is here, and not just here as usual, but also here to embrace, to extend and expand on those conversations. And I am particularly excited for this presentation because it's packed with ideas, ideas of composition, art, music, artistic process, creativity, and any forms of discourse that are relevant to music making today in Africa, in Nigeria, and across the world. Those works that we are going to explore, they embody and they provide insight into different forms of connection today. So let's come back to the conversation. To start with, I would like Mr. Seun to introduce himself to you. Of course, it's a common phenomenon, but it's also good for some of us who are joining for the first time to know who Mr. Seun is. So, Mr. Seun, you are welcome to the Organ House concert and seminar series today. I'm sure our friends online would like to know you. Perhaps you can explain to them or introduce yourself to them.
Okay, my name is Seun Owoaje. I'm a pianist, a composer. I lecture in music. I also run a music consultancy firm in Lagos, which is called Center Techniques. We write music, we perform music, we compose music, we do all sorts of orchestrations and arrangements, and of course we also supply pianos, rental and outright sale. So basically, I'm a music person. Growing up in a musical family. Here in Lagos, I basically have been surrounded with music all my life. So, and then went ahead to study music. And here I am composing and performing and writing and orchestrating and arranging music. So, and of course, it's a pleasure to be here at Organ House, the Organ House
Concert and
Seminar Series again. And it's a pleasure to share this table with my very good friend, Dele.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I call him Uncle Seun, although that conversation is for another day. yeah. So today's conversation, as explained earlier, is going to take a unique, approach and different, steps in terms of how it is curated and how we want to approach it. We are going to have more hands-on, explanations. We are going to pick on themes and ideas, you know. But to start with, I'd like to also remind some of our, friends today that the conversation we're engaging today is not new. It's not a new conversation in that sense. It's a conversation that has been around, particularly on this table, on this particular platform, and which is one of the important core ideas that has shaped also the ideas of African music, African art music, at least in the last 40 years. And of course, the elephant in the room is always the idea of African art music. Uh, you know, People have been trying to explain what is this phenomenon, what is this, what is that. But the question here is not to define. Rather, our concern here is to explore components, characters, figures, compositions that have emerged under this, idea, and how we can start making sense, connecting through sound, sonic practice, creative process, and compositions of those who have engaged these particular ideas. I remember recently we have Professor Mojola, discussing practices and praxis using different forms of composition to explain, a particular idea in within the African art music, uh, ecosystem. But today, I am more interested, in explore going beyond this initial conversation, now moving into creative process. By creative process, I mean what makes a composition what they are, particularly orchestral music in Africa, and by extension, the notion of African art music. Why are they called African art music? Why are they African in the first place? And second layer is, are there theoretical ideas? Are there theoretical ideas? Are there particular approaches? Are there particular ideas that makes them African? And if they are, yes or no, what are these ideas? Yeah, so these are part of the things we want to explore today, and I'm happy uh, Mr. Seun Owoaje is here. So, Mr. Seun Owoaje, the first thing I would like to ask you is, orchestral music has been part of, let's say, the Nigerian life at least in the last 100 years. To say, yeah, 1920 by 1924 already in Lagos we have forms of orchestra performing. Orchestral music was already present by 1924 in Lagos. Yeah, the place called Glover Hall today, or the place called St. Peter's Faji, used to be a concert hall that's where the first operas were staged in Lagos by the colonial officers, and part of the tradition at the time was also forms of orchestral performances. We have the Lagos Brazilian Orchestra, then we have the Lagos Metropolitan Orchestra. Yeah, the orchestra that the first governor was also part of, and the first political party were also part of this orchestra. Yeah. So, but we'll get to those details later. So, I'm just saying this for us to know that orchestra is not a new thing in Nigeria, particularly in the place called Lagos. So, and that practice has extended, over the years. People have built on that tradition over the year in different forms, in different ways, and up to what we have today. And also, we also need to know that the first full-fledged symphonic orchestra, you know, came to be in the late 40s to early 40s, and that is the Apostolic Faith Orchestra. That was the first full-fledged, symphonic orchestra, and I mean all black symphonic orchestra. The initial orchestras were not full-fledged symphonic orchestra. They were more like ensembles or combination of different instruments, but mostly by colonial officers, from different countries playing, accompanying opera, accompanying different forms of functions at the time. But the first full all black orchestra in Nigeria is credited to the Apostolic Faith Church, and particularly their concerts in 1952 and 1956 opened this full-fledged orchestra. That's another story on its own. But it's important for us to know about these stories. And also from the 1970s in Lagos, we have the CAC came into another spotlight. Most of the churches were affiliated to the Royal School of Church Music, and we have different churches, both although from huge influence for the Apostolic Faith, we started having, pockets of groups across churches, particularly the CAC Church in Lagos. They have orchestras, started being orchestras, and by the 1980s, of course, our churches across have now used to, orchestra members, although not full, but groups of violinists, cellists accompanying major works alongside organ. So, and the 1990s, we enter into a different realm with the emergence, first of all, of Muson, then followed by the Mountain of Fire and Miracle Church. Yeah. So, scholars have done series of work. In the scholarly space also, we have series of compositions. Of course, most of these compositions people have not been able to perform the work because there are no orchestra to perform them. In the public space. Most of the orchestra I mentioned, most of them are mostly church orchestras and performing oratorio work and most Western derived works. Then the composers within the universities have not been able, of course, to really perform their own work in the public space due to lack of, orchestra to do so. Yeah. But the only work that was even performed, recorded, were most popular was the work were the works of Fela Showande, which were recorded in London, BBC at the time. We'll get to all this conversation and all these details, but let's start from the major point. So, Mr. Seun Owoaje, let's start from the artistic process. I'm sure you are aware of this ongoing conversation about creative process. What makes, an African composition? Yeah, what makes an African composition? What makes, African art music? And particularly, people have even asked, is it possible to have an African orchestra, with Western European music? Many people are also of the opinion that we should have our own. Of course, our own in this sense is quite, I use it very cautiously. We should have our own orchestra. And in most cases, this conversation has been around people using indigenous music. Of course, the notion of orchestra itself is not only Western in nature. Every culture has their own, idea, local concept, of what we can call orchestra. And people have made cases for this kind of, idea. We should use African orchestra. We should use African approach. But my question to you, the first question is, how can a creative and artistic medium like music compositions, for European type orchestras, tell and promote African stories? Is that possible?
Okay. Well, you have said a lot of things, which just basically, I think I'll just share my inputs, my ideas on this, on some of the things that you have said. Maybe not all of it, but at least some of it. Now you have talked about African music. What makes music African? What makes it? For instance, when we say African art music, quite a number of factors, a number of elements would determine whether the music is African or it is not African or somewhere in between. First of all, is geography. Of course, African music would naturally, most of the time at least, be deemed to be music that emanates out of the place, the situation, the situation in place that is called Africa. So geography, and then of course ethnicity, nationality, also plays a part. Of course, African music, not 100%, because of course we've had people who are non-Africans, fully non-Africans, some African American who can be, said to be maybe half African, some who are not African at all. Some who are completely white, who have composed stuff that they and other people claim are African oriented, you know. So ethnicity, ascendancy, who you are, who your people are, of course, also plays a part. So most of the time, naturally, if you as an African, especially someone who grew up, an African who grew up here in Africa, composed music, of course, naturally, it could be said to be African music, just based on that alone. Of course, there are other elements, you know. And then, thirdly, there are still more, but thirdly, maybe I'll stop there. Thirdly, we're talking of elements, you know, influences, the things that you would naturally witness in that music. Now, naturally, again, if as an African you grew up in Africa, okay, and then somewhere along the line you happen to compose music, at least there would be some African influence, some influence of the fact that you grew up here, you know, having listened to the melodies, the harmonies, the rhythms of Africa, the drums, and all those. There's no way that at least some of those things would not, in some way or the other, would not have influenced your music to various degrees. So, and of course, again, we talk about African art music. You know, the question is often asked, what makes art music art music? And of course, there are all sorts of theories. Yes, and explanations. Is it that some will say, okay, once music is written down, then it becomes art music. So if I take Sunny Ade's music or Kwamwon, King Wasiu Ayinde Marshall's music, and I just score it, does that make it art music already? It's very, very contentious. However, we know that some of these people that I've mentioned now, Sunny Ade, Kwamwon, and so on and so forth, and people in the popular music space, there's a certain way that their music sounds, which simply by the time you hear it, something will just tell you that no, this is not art music. And there's a certain way that, you know, art music, of the art musicians, the practitioners of art music, those who practice art, those who studied art music, there's a certain way that it sounds, you know, that you just basically, you may want to agree, okay, this sounds like art music. So there are all sorts of contentions in that area. Now, coming to orchestral music, how did you frame your question?
Yeah, the question is, how does, you know, orchestra, European type orchestra tell and promote African studies? How can they promote?
Okay.
Because people believe that because they are European in nature, so they are not African. So, and because of that, so we should look for African instrument to tell the story. So the question is about, another layer to the question is, can this instrument tell African, you know, stories? Can they tell, you know, African stories? So that is another layer to it.
Okay, good. Let me start from that layer of, can these instruments tell,
and how particularly, you know.
Okay, now instruments are, you know, instruments can, they are, you can, in a way, an argument that just basically occurred to me now is that, you know, instruments, they're like stars in the galaxy.
Yeah.
They have been made to do this, to do that, and they do not determine what they do. They are maker. Okay, God, in their own sense, in their own way, in their own sense, made them and, you know, told them what to be doing. Now, instruments. I mean, musical instruments are things that human beings made.
Yeah.
Okay, and of course, human beings made these instruments to serve our proclivities, to serve our purpose. So whatever it is that you want to, I believe that whatever it is that you want to an instrument to do, especially if that instrument has been fashioned in that direction, of course, that instrument would do. So I believe that, yes, it is possible to make Western instruments, the instruments of the orchestra, to tell African stories. Okay. I believe that, you know, to a certain degree, I believe that yes, Western instruments, in the Western orchestra. I'm still coming back to the instruments of the African orchestra, instruments in Africa. But I believe that Western instruments can be made to 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 tell African stories. Let me share a little bit of a of a big picture. I mean, sensibility in terms of orchestra.
Okay.
An orchestra is like an instrument on its own. You know, the different instruments, you can look at them as like an as you know, one big set of instruments. They can be made to basically, you can use them to paint pictures, okay, to make impressions, okay. Let me give let me zero in on an example. For instance, if you look at the movement of impressionism, okay, in the European art music, and not only art music, you know, it didn't start from the music. That basically actually started from the artworks of Monet, Claude Monet, Degas, and so on and so forth. It started from the art, from the fine art, and then of course it spilled over into music in a way. Even though some of the musicians of those times, you know, like Claude Debussy, the very first, I mean, impressionist, you know, big impressionist and composer, kind of wasn't comfortable with his music being called impressionism. But the world has come to accept that as being impression. So we don't want to go into that again. That's another. So now, the idea behind impressionism is that you don't want to make anything, you know, you want to make things lucid. You don't want to make anything very, very concrete.
Yeah.
You just want to create an impression.
No specificity.
No specificity, thank you. No specificity. You don't just want to create like a general impression.
Yeah.
Using colors, you know, sometimes shockingly different colors. The kind of colors that wouldn't have been used before the advent of the Impressionism. The kind of colors that wouldn't have been used together. People like Monet, you know, Degas and so on and so forth, they used these colors to paint the impression, a general impression. Blurry lines, blurry faces, blurry atmospheres, and so on and so forth. Now, they used that. They established that technique in art. And of course, it spilled over into music. Okay, now if you hear if you study and hear the work of Debussy and Ravel and some of the musicians, some of the composers that came after them, and some of the less six, even though it's been said that the less six are like a reactionary to their work. That's another.
The French six, right?
Yes, the French six. You know, not all of them are French. Like 5 of them are French.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at their works, a lot of their works are basically like painting impressions. Yeah. No concreteness. You know, and no concreteness. You know, you can talk of this inconcretency in terms of the tonality, for example, in terms of the functionality of the harmony. There are no clear chords, you know, chord movements like you had before them, chord movements of chord 1 to 4, and then resolving to 5, and then back to 1. The lines were blurred. You know, they used a lot of pandiatonicism, pentatonicism,
also
and so on and so
because
forth.
they came from, it was just kind of they emerged from what is now explained as nationalist ideas.
Yes, nationalist ideas.
Romantic to late romantic ideas.
Yes.
So that afforded them the opportunity to explore.
Yes, to explore.
Even this idea of impressionism and this lack of being specific is a way of, you know, still explaining more like how like it now? Experimentation.
Yes, experimentation and establishing a style away from what was from what used to be.
Self-defining.
Yes, exactly.
Expressing myself here. So
exactly.
Of course, I agree with you. But one thing I also want you to.
Sorry, Dele. Okay. Before, let me just. I wanted to explain something in terms of using the use of the orchestra, of the European orchestra, to tell an African story. Yeah. Now, they used the direction of the music, you know, zeroing in on the music now of the Debussys and Ravels and Honegas, Melaud, and so on and so forth, Now, they basically used the orchestra in a different way from what the Romantics and the pre-Romantics, that is the classical period musicians Mozart, Haydn,
of course.
and then Beethoven, and so on and so forth. They used it in a different way. They basically used the orchestra also, similar to what they use their piano works to do. They use the orchestra to paint pictures, okay, to paint vague impressionist pictures. So that just basically tells you, that example alone, aside from the examples that ensued after them or even before them, that basically tells you that basically the orchestra is there, a group of instruments that you can basically use if you are skilled enough with your orchestration, okay, with the elements, if you are skilled with, if you know your orchestration, basically the orchestra is there for you to do basically. So yes, you can, just in the same way as the Impressionists, for example, used orchestra to paint pictures, impressionist, vague pictures. The orchestra, even the European orchestra, can be used to tell stories, whether it's African or European story,
you just mentioned
or Asian.
sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you just to connect.
No
the dots
problem.
here. So, I'm happy you mentioned skill in orchestration. Can you explain that a bit? What does that mean? I mean, for a layman who wants to write, because even we also need to understand that writing for orchestra nowadays is now open to the public now.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is
with the
not,
advent of all these writing softwares.
It's now open. Yeah. Because just a few days I saw somebody who was not a musician, has no grounding in that sense with music notation. But I listened to their work and I saw the way they arrangement with strings, woodwind, and brass. I find it very interesting. So because of people like that who are on this platform, what is orchestration? What are the basic explanation? Because that can help us shift into that conversation proper for them to see, okay, this is what I've been doing. What is orchestration?
Okay. Basically, orchestration in a nutshell is basically using the instruments of the orchestra, using them in a harmoniously agreeable form to play together and to derive this, whatever it is that you want to put across.
Story you want to tell.
Either to yourself. Well, in terms of if it's a story, then of course it's a story you want to tell with it.
Yeah.
So like I said, if you are skilled with your orchestration, then of course you can tell a story with it. So basically, orchestration is using the know-how. That's why it is called orchestration. That is the art of using the orchestra to basically, write music that will be cohesive and would be congruent with whatever it is that you want to. And don't forget that there are all sorts of different musics of different periods. And what you are writing, whatever it is that you are writing, has to be congruent with a certain style, with a certain language. So it's not just a question of just writing anything.
Putting things together anyhow.
No.
Yeah.
And then, of course, orchestration has its routines, the things that you need to know. For example, some of the very, very rudimentary things that you need to know, for example, about the orchestra is the different instruments of the orchestra. You have to know what range. Their ranges, okay, in terms of their lowest notes, their highest notes. That is just basically, rudimentary, like kindergarten of orchestration. Yeah. Then, in addition to knowing that very, very rudimentary part of knowing what's the highest note of a bassoon and the lowest note of that same bassoon is, you have to know what are its different qualities, timbres. They call it timbre. Yes, timbres of its different ranges. What are the because of course even the sound of each and every instrument, they are not homogeneous in terms of what it sounds like in the low register is not necessarily what it sounds like in the medium and in the upper register. So you have to know how these instruments cross over. How does it cross over? How does the clarinet, for example, how does it cross over from the chalumeau? You call the lowest register the chalumeau register. How does it cross over into the medium register and into the high register? What does it sound like in the high register?
Definitely.
What sort of things can you use it to do that would be congenial, that will be wholesome and will not be burdensome to the ear? And of course, even, I mean, if you want to use an oboe, for example, a clarinet in the high register, for how long can you use it? That the air naturally will not get tired of it. Say, that sound is becoming a bore, and all those.
Exactly.
So these things that I've just talked about now, these are like the basics, the rudiments of orchestration. Now, I'll quickly add that people like Ravel, for example, Ravel was especially famous for his orchestration. He was an exceptional orchestrator. And if you study the gamut of film music today, even today, film music from the past 70 years up till now, a lot of them just basically hang on the principles of Ravel's orchestration. If you listen to a lot of Ravel, and then you listen to a lot of film music with orchestras, you will just hear Ravel, Ravel all over it,
Okay, well, that's an interesting point, though. We'll come back to that. Yeah. So now, what you explain now is simply that anyone who have understanding of the tonal
quality
resources.
Yes, resources.
That each instrument embodies.
Yes.
Can you use that knowledge?
Yes.
To tell a story?
Definitely.
Bringing the sound together, because it's like crafts, sound design.
Yes.
Knowing that, okay, if I want to, because,
what you call soundscape.
Soundscape,
Yes.
Yeah. So you want to get a particular result. There's something in the brain. Oh, I like this sound. I like this perception. I want to go. So understanding or having knowledge of a particular, for instance, clarinet.
Yes.
The lower register,
Chalumo register, yes.
compared to the middle register and the top register, which can be very, very
shrill.
Exactly.
Shrill, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Compared to instrument like violin, we also the lower register is also very rich.
Yes.
Yeah, and also the middle register also, depending on the positions
and the technique.
The technique.
Yes,
the
technique. You can use Ponticello, which makes it sound and you can play it very smooth, very legato sort of thing.
Yeah. So these are all resources.
Yes.
That are available to anyone who wants to paint a picture.
Yes.
Or who wants to tell a story. There are resources that can inform a particular way of telling an African story.
Yes.
Of telling, it could be a satire, it could be a serious
story,
theme.
Yes.
So is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Don't forget also that I'll add two very quickly, two important points. Don't forget that even the instruments of the European orchestra, many of them did not start as being European instruments.
Okay.
They had their ancestors.
Of course.
Many of them coming from the Middle East.
Definitely.
Okay. They had their ancestors hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, the Europeans adopted these instruments and they shaped them. They modified them over centuries. Yeah. And then, to fit their own proclivities.
Of course.
And in the same way too now, some of these European instruments are now being adopted into the African music family and being looked at as being African music. For example, the piano, talking about African pianism, which is another conversation.
Definitely, I agree with you. Okay, I want to move further. Can I have this score, this particular score, and Lealaja? This one. Okay. Yes. Can I have it? Can I have the copy? This copy. Yeah.
Yes.
This one. Bring the two scores. Thank you so much. Yeah. So let's talk. So let's go into the process now.
Okay.
The creative process now. I think the first thing that that strikes in this composition, for instance. So how do we get here to start with, to carry, for our followers online? We're talking about how do we use European orchestra instrument to tell African stories.
Okay.
So
can you put the full orchestral score?
The full orchestral score.
Yes, that's the piano score.
Okay.
Let's have the full orchestral score. I'll also send you the message. Okay.
Okay. So, okay.
Okay.
So, I think the first thing that, you know, seeing a score like this, and Lea Alaja as a title,
Yes.
that's a story on its own.
Yes, it's a story actually.
Yes. And to start with,
It's a narrative.
It's a narrative, of
Yes.
course. So, and we got to this place because we are talking about how do we tell African story with, European,
European
instrument, orchestra, I mean European type orchestra, because orchestra now we need to be very, very specific.
Specific, yes.
Yeah, there's orchestra across culture.
Yes, across
So we're
cultures,
talking about
yes.
European type orchestra,
Yes.
telling African story. The first thing that comes to mind seeing this piece is the title, Enle Alaja. So, why? Why? Because we are used to European type orchestra telling a more decent in quotes
Yes.
stories. Few whatever, something for this or this, romance for cello, this for
Yes,
this.
yes.
So, but taking it into the African everyday life is not so common. It's there, of course. We have composers who enjoy doing something like this, But even at that, this is more mundane. It's an everyday story. Why?
Okay. Yes, like you said, this is more rootsy, like going to the roots.
Yeah.
Well, basically, a composition can come forth from two main inspirational angles. You can just basically have an idea in your head that, okay, look, I have this idea due to this experience, or this particular experience, or this dimension of experiences all over the years. So, and I want to pen something down in that direction. So you can have a composition, an inspiration to write a composition in that, following that route, or you could be commissioned, maybe for a film, or someone wrote a piece of music, he would like you to set it, someone wrote a melody, they would like you to set it towards, and they may or may not pay you or something, So, well, basically, Enle Alaja it's a theme that has been basically like playing in my head about a certain folk or rootsy African situation. Okay. Well, let me start with the title. Enle Alaja means well done. Alaja, it's like greeting you. Say, when you see someone in Yoruba, among the Yoruba, you can say Enlesa.
Yeah.
Enlesa means how are you, sir, or well done, sir. It actually has a number of possible meanings, but it's basically a greeting to someone. Okay, so Enle means how are you, or how are you doing?
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Yes, well done there, kind of thing. And it's a greeting that Yoruba people, of the not so, well, some of the educated too, because I use it all the time, and lesser, but a lot of the not so educated and educated people, among the Yoruba people, use that phrase, Enle Alaja, And Alaja is a female person who has done the Hajj, the Muslim Hajj.
Yeah.
Okay, when you go to Mecca, according to the prescriptions of the Prophet Muhammad of the, of the Islamic religion, which is a prescription for every Muslim to do, you go to the Holy Land, which is Mecca, do a pilgrimage. When you go there and then you come back, you become an alaja. Alaja meaning a female, a person, a woman who has gone to Mecca and come back. If you're a man, you'll be an alaji. Okay.
Yeah.
So enle alaja means well done, alaja, or greetings to you, alaja, or enle alaji, well done, alaji, greetings to you, I'm greeting you, alaji. So in my head, it's a situation of a local community in which the people of the community, they meet like they normally would meet sometimes, and then they greet themselves. Enle alaji, enle alaja, báwo ni, ilé ńkọ́, ọmọ ńkọ́, all those things, and then they discuss, of course, when a village or a town meets like this, like, they will have things to discuss. So in this case, what they have to discuss is the imminence of them, some of them going to Mecca. Okay? And then finally, they arrive at the fact that, okay, they are going to Mecca. Okay? And then this story that as I'm narrating it now, the music, as it goes along, kind of bears that narrative, If you know the music, you can hear this narrative in the music. You can hear the greetings. You can hear the violin. Let me go to the fact that this music is written for solo violin, piano, solo piano, and the orchestra. Okay, the European orchestra, and then some African percussion, some few African percussion instruments. Yes, there are a few African percussion, just about 2 or 3 of them. There's akuba, there's shekere, and then there's clave. Yes, there's clave. Yes, agogo. So in this music, violins, the solo violin is alaja. Okay, takes the place of alaja. The piano takes the place of alaji. Okay, speaks like the alaji is speaking. The solo violin speaks like, alaja is speaking, takes the place of the alaja. And then the orchestra takes the place of the townspeople. Okay, so you have the solo violin and the solo piano, and then the townspeople accompanying, whatever it is, the conversation. So it's a conversation. It's actually written like the subtitle is Conversation Between Solo Violin, Piano, and Orchestra. So, and then of course, the music basically tells that story of the imminence and then the breaking of the news of going to Mecca, and then the going to Mecca and then the coming back. I'm just sharing it in and then the coming back and then the jubilation. The song. There's a song there's a main theme to it, aside from other little things.
Okay, I'm happy you mentioned the theme, because that's my next question now. And I'm with the piano score right now.
Yes.
For instance, let's go to bar 12.
Yes. So that would be this. Yes. If I can. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this is not on. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm particularly interested. I want to see the connection.
I can't hear you. Okay.
Yeah, I want to see the connection of this particular.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to see the connection of this motivic. Is this the motive? Is this the theme, or these are just normal, introductory riffs or ideas that eventually, because there's a conversation already.
Yes, already. Yes.
You can see the conversation from bar 12 already.
Yes.
So can you just let's see.
So that's the main theme that I played there, which to start with, the first instrument that played that main thing was the double bass.
Double bass.
Bari kare oe, bari kare, bari kare oe o, bari kare, alaja tore mekato, bari kare.
Yes, and that is the basis of my first question to you. That because on a normal day, particularly, I'm very particular now, the established canon for orchestration or the idea of orchestra, people hardly think in that. People, it will be difficult for a trained, orchestrator, composer to want to go. It's, of course, I'm not saying it's not possible, depending on the exposure or cultural awareness of that composer, but it's not a common thing.
Okay, to do what?
To draw on themes like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a common thing to draw on themes like this. Okay. Particularly things crossing into the other parts.
Okay.
What we are used to is indigenous story.
Okay.
Both in opera, orchestra, engagement, choral work.
Okay.
Then also religious stories that has to do with Christianity.
Okay.
Because that's the route through which orchestra came in, of course,
Yes.
And colonial adventures, of course. But now going into the other route, which is the other layer that sometimes, of course, we all know that there's a lot of contention, but in the scholarly realm, compositional realm, creative realm, of course, there's no boundary. But you going into that realm, Muslim realm, the social life.
Yes.
What you have done is waka.
Something like that.
Yes. This is waka.
Yes.
This is waka.
Yes, were waka and all that.
This is waka.
Yes.
This is what they use in welcoming those who just came back from Hajj.
Exactly.
This is entertainment for them.
Exactly.
This is a team this is a major team that showcases that they've traveled to Hajj and they are back. So it's an established culture.
Yes.
Of the Muslim, Yoruba Muslims.
Yes.
It's an established culture. So of course, Akinwuba and other prominent scholars have written about this particular social practices in Nigeria. There's a lot of scholarship in this area, of course. But now moving from a mere scholarship, it's not a mere scholarship, of course, their work is not just a mere work, but I'm saying moving from research idea into creativity, using that same resources in a different way, telling that same story, but through orchestral music is what I think it's not common.
Yes.
It's not common. And that is my point of entry.
Okay.
When I say, using European-derived orchestral idea to tell African story. Now, you played it now. Of course, I'm excited to see something like this. But the question is, how do you feel, exploring this kind of theme, particularly with orchestral instruments, exploring them, and making a common sense, drawing meanings, even with orchestral instrument, is a point of my question to you.
Okay.
Because many people would not think about this, because even orchestration study itself does not really allow for this kind of material, does not acknowledge this stuff as resources. Because when you learn about orchestration, you are given 4 parts, harmony, orchestrate, this. People will hardly go and take a waka team for you to learn orchestration. So, and this is my own point of entry. Hence, I said earlier, I'm interested in creative process. So what we are trying to do now is to enter into that realm of your creative process. Now, another layer on this same question is this also an outcome of your own research as a scholar, as an artistic person who is also a scholar, a researcher, or is an embodiment of a search for you because you grew up in Lagos, and of course. So, how do we place it?
Okay. Starting from your last, from this last question. It's actually both. It's actually both. For me, I have always, the one major characteristic of my music that you could see if you care to look at my music is there's the speaking element.
Speaking element.
Yes, in a lot of my music, there's a talking element, which of course is a very, very African thing. Okay. And my research, a lot of my research, my thesis is based on surrogacy.
Surrogacy, of course.
Which is the characteristic of using instruments to speak. Okay, my research, my PhD thesis is based on that. So this is part of, gaining more inroad into my thesis.
Okay.
To prove my thesis.
Okay.
To prove the things that I postulated in my thesis.
That Western orchestra.
Yes, Western instruments.
Can tell
yes.
local stories.
Yes.
Particularly from the Yoruba perspective.
Exactly. Okay. And also, of course, that's the research aspect.
Okay.
Also, it's a creative inspirational thing for me. I'll dare say that from when I was even a much younger person, I've always loved that theme. So on and so forth. So I've always envisaged a time in which I would somehow set that theme down to music, to something. And well, it's just as well that now that it's like I'm using one stone to kill two birds. So it's ensuing forth out of my creative inclinations, and it also serves for my research purposes.
Okay, another layer to it. This is quite. I'm interested in this conversation because it has many layers. Yes. We're talking about composition now, African art music. There's another layer to it, which includes sound studies, soundscape. That music you spoke about, this particular culture, is part of everyday life soundscape.
Yes.
Across many places in southwest region of Nigeria.
Definitely.
So it's part of sound studies. So when we talk about sound studies, we're not just talking about music specifics. Like you talk about, and I'm happy you mentioned impressionist idea the other time. So it's also about soundscape. What makes Lagos Lagos? What makes this particular environment what they have? Part of the things that make Lagos is this everyday at the market square, on even cities.
But those would be for that. This would be for the more. I don't want to say rural. There's hardly any rural, but the
suburbs,
not the highbrow places.
Of
course, not the highbrow places.
The suburb, like
Mushin, exactly.
Agege,
yes, where you have more people who are not so very, economically empowered. People who are not the rich people.
Okay. That is
because if you go to places like Ikoyi, you won't see this sort of thing. But of course, if you go to Mushin,
definitely.
You go to Agege, if you go to Shomolu, yes, you would see, you'd probably see
as
more.
I was mentioned, even across the soundscape,
yes,
most of the roadside radio record operators,
exactly,
these sounds fly across, you get
exactly.
it across. That's what I mean by I spoke about sound studies.
Yes, to add to corroborate what you this thing that you said, I grew up in Mushin. Okay. Our parents didn't allow us to listen to Muslim music or any music that is associated with anything Muslim, like Fuji music, for instance, Waka music, Were music, Dadakwada, all those things. Of course, our parents being staunch Christians, you would enter their trouble if they see you dancing or listening actively to this music. However, because we grew up there, you cannot escape it. The record players are playing it, as you are going along in the streets.
Definitely.
Although I would say that we grew up in the more upper class side of Mushin. But even in those upper places, yes, you can't escape it. as you are entering a bus, it is these sounds, it is these things that the bus conductors and the drivers are playing. As you are getting down from the bus, and you know, in those days there were record shops. There aren't many record shops now because you know digital music has taken over.
Of course.
But in those days there were record shops who were constantly blasting this this Muslim
sound,
Islamic oriented music all over the place. So someone like me simply cannot miss it. It just entered my system. I couldn't help it.
And that's why I shifted the conversation and expanding it beyond composition or African art music, expanding it also into sound studies. Sound studies it's not just about music, it's about how spaces are built, but understanding them through sound. Stephen Feld called it acoustemology, that is knowing through sound. So he explained sound, knowledge through music or music research or whatever practice one is doing, but he calls it acoustemology, that is knowing, mapping through sound. So I can decide to I can study a phenomenon through the lens of acoustemology, using sound to explain different phenomena. So from what you said now, and the basic argument for that is, even for as a creative resource, is that people embody it without even knowing about it.
Of course not.
But when it's time to exhibit that creativity, it comes naturally. And it becomes resources, tools, or materials for creativity.
Definitely.
So that is what I can see right now. I don't know if so that's what I can see right now. And I'm happy we're having this conversation. So having barika, barika, so these are embodied. Now, one more question to that before we move to the second major question is, can we talk, one thing about composition that we have seen so far, or the argument or the debate, let's just call it debate on this platform regarding African art, is a question of theory. Theory. Okay. Can we talk about underlying theoretical component in this theme, or the ideas, your creative approach to this now?
Okay. When you talk of underlying
creative theories, creative explanation.
Okay. Okay. Well, as a studied musician, someone who has studied music, one of the things that you would want to do, if you are not to compose music just anyhow, that would have no bearing, is for every piece of music that you compose, you have to basically give yourself a brief.
Okay.
Yes. Or precompositional considerations.
Yes, okay.
On what you can do and what you cannot do with this music that you're composing. So, which means you can't just compose anything. You can't just, some notes cannot enter into that. Some notes, because of their characteristics, some certain notes cannot enter into that.
Definitely.
Into that composition, or some certain chords, or some certain things, some certain ideas cannot enter into it because of. So you want to give yourself a brief, and also I would also stress that as an orchestrator, knowing your orchestration, the things. Let me point out one or two things. Talking about orchestration. As an orchestrator, it is so beneficial, in fact, beyond beneficial for you. If we use the word beneficial, it will almost mean that you could do without it. But no, you really cannot do without it that much. Things like the elements of advanced music, things like things like harmony.
Okay, definitely.
Okay, things like harmony, things like rhythmic capacities, and things like what do you call it now? So all these things, they are elements that would definitely help you, in your in your orchestration, your tonality, knowing your tonalities, knowing your harmonies, and so on and so forth. These are things that you cannot do without. Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult for you to do a convincing orchestration without knowing your orchestration, without knowing your harmony, and without knowing, your tonalities very, very well. I would also add this, that, see, without knowing these basics, your harmony, having, being well grounded in your harmony, the what do you call it now? Your alternatives, the alternatives are even more complicated. If you are not well grounded in harmony, in orchestration and all those elements that actually would make you a good orchestration, the alternatives, of just wanting to just write anything, of course, those they would not serve you at all.
Wow, that's great. Then let's move to the second question. Okay, we might, there's possibility because the questions are quite interconnected. So my second question then is, given this interesting, how we've experienced and exploring this creative process now. So then the second question is, can we say or explain that this is this a new practice, or what are we could say, what is a contemporary approach or to composition for orchestra, in today's Nigeria? Do we have an established idea of composition, or are there new approaches? Because from your work, this particular layer like that right now, and some of your recent work also, even beyond the orchestra medium, talking about piano composition, there are traits, there are motifs, there are ideas, themes that are quite contemporary, in terms of how you treat material and how you treat your resources. So can we then say, okay, because these materials depart in most cases radically from initial established notion of writing for orchestra, from what we have seen, particularly from, I can give an example from the works of the 60s, 1950s, even from Nigerian composers who have written for this medium. What, as explained earlier, what is popular from their approaches in most cases is to use indigenous resources, trying to paint the kind of picture from indigenous idea, and perhaps playing with choir, playing with local opera, playing with different medium, which is still very, 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 which align, most of their work align with the indigenous idea, because that's the kind of story and pictures they are trying to paint. But in your own case, you stand in the middle of this conversation, which is contemporary themes, like Enlealaja is a case in point, which is also everyday discourse.
Written, yes.
And contemporary medicine. Then I remember, of course, even in your engagement with indigenous resources, like for the hunters, something for the hunters, I remember.
Is it for the group for the master drummer?
Group for the master drummer, and
yes.
then one again for hunters conversation also.
Yes. The hunter and the that's Hunter's Arguments. Yes, Hunter's Argument. Yeah, yes, there's a sonata for Hunter's, which is called Hunter's Arguments.
So all this material, despite the folk-laden theme, they also, the treatment also align with contemporary sound. Now, does that mean that there is a contemporary approach now which departs from the initial standard or tradition?
Okay. Now, for musical expressions, as the times go by, the decades, the centuries, and so on and so forth, you want to explore new sounds, new things. You don't want to keep on doing the same thing that people have been done. People are doing. You don't want to do that. So you want to explore new sounds, new ideas, new tonalities, new elements, and so on and so forth. You want to explore those things. And that is what brings about my looking for fresh material. Okay, fresh material, something that will sound fresh.
Sound fresh.
Yes.
Okay, I'll come back.
And if it sounds fresh, trust me, even I will be inspired to write it. If it doesn't sound fresh, I would, as an artist, I would not be inspired to write it, to sit down and write it and give it the best shot that I can. But if it does sound fresh, if it has fresh materials, fresh tonalities, fresh themes, fresh harmonies, and so on and so fresh rhythms, and so on and so forth, or at least one of all these 4 or 5 elements that I've counted now, at least if it has one element that is very fresh, that would be enough, to inspire me to sit down and and do, yes, and write. And of course, again, talking about how the relevance, yes, societal relevance, yes, you want to write something that would be relevant, that would have some relevance in the audience's, the way the audience, is hearing and perceiving, in the audience's perception. You don't want to write music that is just music alone, just a sort of a set of sounds that has no bearing with any story, any societal commentary or anything. No, you want to write music that people can relate with one way or the other. Either it's a story or it's a social commentary. It's a commentary on the contemporary happenings. Either a political, whatever, or you are spewing forth a lesson, okay, to the to the society, like you have in Madiolo.
Madulo, yeah.
Yes, like you have in Madiolo. That's a lesson to not struggle, to not don't don't fight so hard to be rich. Just work. I believe. Just do your work. Okay, do your honest, diligent work, and you'll be blessed. Okay, without having to die trying to get rich.
Get rich. Wow, wow. Now there's another layer to it, which is on this same question. So yeah, this one, and you have explained from your own perspective, which basically you are looking for
Fresh material.
materials
Yes.
that can inspire you
Yes.
to write. And that writing, those compositions also, according to you, needs to speak to the audience, needs to be relevant
Yes.
to people.
It does.
And when you mean people, now you're talking about the people, the masses,
Yes.
not just the community of understanding, of practice, talking about the common people, Yeah. Then, is this an established practice in today's Nigeria, particularly in terms of composition, arrangement? Is this an established rhetoric or ideology or philosophy or things that you think, okay, this is a new trend? Is it a trend or this is just you? Are there similar patterns in other people composing for orchestra now?
Well, I really can't say I have seen similar patterns with people, presently, contemporary, people. I can't say there aren't people, but I have not really actively seen people using the kind of ideas that I am using. Maybe there are, but I can't say. But the thing about composition, life, and of course composition, is that things get repeated, events get repeated over time. I mean, when Fela Showande came with the African suite,
Sweet, yeah.
and Onidodo and all that, it sounded very, very fresh
Of course.
to people. Him using those themes, with a European orchestra,
Yeah.
sounded very fresh. And of course, he was looking for fresh material. He
at
didn't
the
want,
time,
yes,
okay.
at that time, he didn't want to just write something that would sound another Beethoven or another Haydn or
Yeah.
Mozart or another, Handel. He wanted to write something that would be characteristically African. And of course, he got the job done.
Speaking to the social and cultural context of the
Yes,
time. Yeah.
yes. Although much later, criticism came against him that okay, the only thing he did was to just use those melodies. There was nothing. But at the time that he did it, it got the job done. It got the attention of the world, you know. So now it's our time now, you know, almost 100 years later, or maybe 80 years later or so. And so we also have to look for fresh ways, fresh, nice, wholesome ways to keep the music, to keep the conversation, you know, going.
Okay. I am going to get back to this definitely. But what I also noticed is that in your own particular approach, like you explained, you privilege contemporary resources and approaches, right? Yeah. What does, okay, you privilege contemporary resources and approaches, and it's quite evident in even the sound, in terms of kind of sound that people attach to you. Now, is this attached in one way or the other to a particular way of doing things, or this is just you? Because I'm saying this simply because we have composers, we have scholars, who have different approaches also. So we have scholars, composers who will align their own work. Oh, this is how this thing looks like in indigenous culture, or this particular practice, or these established ways of doing it, and this is what I'm following. It's working, of course, but the question is there something like this that speaks to your own compositional practices?
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of, are there standardized ideology, tested practices, or scholarly approaches in this area? Or this is just you say, okay, if it speaks to me, I'm going to do it.
Okay, you know, like I said earlier on, my compositions and zeroing in on Ilalaja
Okay.
stands on basically two legs that I would explain, two legs in a certain dimension.
Yeah.
It says that one, it is inspirational, okay, and then it is also research. It's also research based. Research meaning me now trying to, you know, justify all my postulations in my thesis that it is possible to make these instruments, not just a piano alone, you know, to speak. And remember, the piano is not originally even an African instrument. Originally, it is a European instrument, you know. According to Akiruba, the piano, you know, some composers have now adopted some instruments, including the piano, to be part of the African instruments ensemble. So I'm basically following in that direction of milking that theory even more, you know, going further in that theory of say, okay, it's not just, Akinyuba was basically talking mostly in terms of the piano, you know, talking about African pianism. You know, he came with this African pianism thing. Not that he was the first person to do African pianism stuff, but he was the one to put it down as like something that can actually be read. Say, okay, if you want to use the piano in an African way, this and this and this and this and this are the things that you need to, you know, making the piano speak as like an African instrument, using this, you know, bringing the African rhythms to bear on it, and so on and so forth. And of course, you know, furthermore to Akinyuba and other, you know, scholars, they talk of research musicology. You know, sorry, research composition. Research composition. So this Enlealaja is also research composition based. So it's standing basically on two legs. Of the leg of it is inspirational. This is something that inspires me to do. And of course, this is also research, you know, trying to research into it's not just writing. It's these things have to be researched into. In order for you to use an African element or an African resource, you basically want to research into that resource well enough for you to be able to use it.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'll be what they call a dilettante, someone who's just dabbling into something that you are not really, that conversant with.
Okay. I think I quite agree with you, and I'm happy you also mentioned Akinyuba and other scholars because that's the very reason why I asked that question. Because, and this is not just about orchestral music alone, it's also about this emerging conversation, around African art music,
Okay.
and central to it is the notion that African art music itself uh, should be rooted in indigenous idea through research, should be shaped or informed by research into African indigenous culture. And this, for me, is where your own work tends to push the conversation because Enlealaja, for instance, it belongs to the contemporary, not the indigenous. Yeah, in terms of the resources. Of course, Barika Reo is more like in the neo-African kind of culture, but it's not indigenous like that. It's contemporary. Even. You can say it's contemporary because it's still something that associated with contemporary culture.
Maybe you want to call it neo-traditional.
Neo-traditional.
Yes, neo-traditional.
I'm even talking about the understanding of that particular song right now.
Okay.
People, the kind of engagement, people like what you have just done. So you engage that material on an everyday basis of association or a kind of embodiment, not in terms of it standing there as an indigenous culture. I want to intentionally go and I'm doing research on it, then to compose. No, you embody it. And because of that kind of embodiment, it has been part of you. It's part of your sound world, sonic world. So you took that idea from that. You see, that's what I mean. Now, this is different to the other approach of African music. We need to go research African music, and after the research, we are composing from the derived resources collected, or the kind of theories that we engage, that we encounter in those materials, you see. So I think there are two layers of conversation, but also intertwined in many ways. That is my point. So, no, I just want to...
Before you move on, yes, we can talk about the Barikare theme.
Yeah.
But all the in the it's not just in that composition, for example.
Yeah.
It is not just the double bass or whatever it is at one point or another. Playing the theme.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of things going on.
Yeah.
In the music, the harmonic language, the tonal language. These are all things, in that composition. These are all things that are research based.
Okay.
Yes. These are all things that are research based. The harmonic language, the tonal language, the rhythmic language.
Okay.
In some specific places, for example, they are all they are research based.
Okay.
So it's not just only yes, I was inspired to use that theme. However, some aspects of that composition are very, very research. They are very research based. Yes.
Okay. Let's move. Let's quickly, because we need to open to our friends and colleagues online. The last question I have here for you is the current situation of orchestral situation in Nigeria, of course, and that's what is the social and economic condition of orchestral music in contemporary Nigeria? What is it like? Is orchestral music still a thing in Nigeria, for instance, and are there infrastructure or basis of practice? I mean, a body of practitioners embodying or embracing or promoting, sustaining orchestral practice, orchestral music, orchestral composition in Nigeria.
Well, yes, there are a couple of bodies that are encouraging encouraging and sustaining orchestras, actual orchestras. At least I know of like three, roaming in my head now. I know of the orchestra at MFN, which is I think is the DSO, Divine Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, Defense Orchestra.
Yes, they
Yeah.
used to be a DKO Orchestra.
Yeah.
Now they are Divine Symphony Orchestra. There's an orchestra at Apostolic Faith.
Of course. Yeah.
Yes, they are still existing. The Orchestra of Apostolic Faith happened to be one of the orchestras that I grew up into.
Okay.
Well, not to mislead. I was never part of that orchestra, but growing up, as a young person, there would be an end of year concert, Christmas concert,
Christmas concert, yeah.
that the Apostolic Faith would stage, So our dad, our father, would take us every year
To the concert.
to the concert. There will be one at Anthony Village here in Lagos. I remember that there was a particular year that we attended the one at Anthony Village here, and then the repeats of that same concert, they would do it in like 3 different places or so.
Location. Yeah.
Yes, so they would do at Anthony Village here in Lagos. They would do at Ijebu-Ode, the Apostolic Faith at Ijebu-Ode. So I remember one particular year in which we were at Anthony Village to witness the Anthony Village one, and then we were also a few days, maybe a week later or something like that. We happened to be at Ijebu at that time, and we went to Ijebu-Ode to witness that. So coming back to our point that yes, there is that orchestra that has existed since before that time.
Okay.
Since before I was probably before I was a young person. Maybe that orchestra has existed. Now I also know that there's this this church, this Chris Oyakhilom's church.
Love World. Christ Embassy.
Christ Embassy, yes. Well, I've never been to their rehearsal or performance, but I know. I mean, many of the musicians around.
Okay.
Violinists, trumpeters, trombonists, and so on and so forth. They tell me that they are part of that orchestra. So I think they've been grooming an orchestra now for about 2 years or more. Before it used to be that every year they will just bring together an orchestra at the end of the year that will do a few rehearsals and they'll perform. But now, I think for the past 3 years, they actually have been trying to have an orchestra that rehearses like maybe every week or something like that. So I know that is also there. Then there's Vesta Orchestra.
Okay.
That I happen to conduct perform with a lot. As a matter of fact, the premiere of Enle Alaja was done by Vesta Orchestra and headed by Rosalind Aninye. So that it's a chamber orchestra actually. Okay. It's like a 20-man orchestra, but they are there doing their performances like 2, 3, 4 times a year. Standard performances. And there are all sorts of small groups here and there. Daystar Christian Center. Okay. They will also do a yearly concert at the end of the year. And they will assemble maybe like a 35-man orchestra and do there. So those are the things that are happening in terms of orchestra. And of course, the Mason Orchestra is there. Okay. The Mason Orchestra is there. So you could say that the orchestra thing is yes, it's gaining ground. It's gaining ground. Yes, there are still people who are having their mindset that orchestral music is for the elite, is for a certain people who listen only to classical music. Yes, there are people with that stronghold in their minds. But then again, you have new people who are embracing it all the time. Who are thinking, this orchestral thing is a good thing. Let's have our own.
Let's have our own. Yes. Now, you mentioned Daystar Orchestra.
Yes.
And that brings us back to Enle Alaja. Yeah. So some of the theme you explore in Enlealaja in terms of aesthetic timbre also draw us back to some of your arrangements, some of your composition for Daystar. Because in most cases, for the, at least for some of the works, at least from 2010
Yeah,
down,
2009 or so.
yeah, in fact, let's say from 2010, it became very, very strong, and
Yes.
the work was so.
Yes.
So from that era down to 2017 or today, I don't know. But what I noticed is that your arrangement were quite contemporary, of course, but it has that signature of yours. I'm talking about, for instance, let's talk about that particular song where you arrange that particular
Carol of the Bells.
Carol of the Bells, one.
Okay.
Then the one where
So
that's popular on the internet now.
Hallelujah, yes, Hallelujah, Oga, yes, Hallelujah, Ogo, yes.
Yeah. So the Hallelujah. So what is going on? That's a particular. That's I think when I'm talking about Elijah now. So the listening to or looking at this call or the kind of resources that one encounters here, I can connect to that work. Is there any connection in terms of the way you do this kind of work, particularly for Daystar now? Yeah, how you have built this? Because when you talk about Daystar orchestra or music, there's a different understanding that speaks to the common man in Lagos. You know, because when Daystar, there's that picture of that orchestra, and that orchestra, the picture is different to the established knowledge of orchestra, because that orchestra does a lot of stuff.
Yes.
So, can you tell us about that?
Okay, now the Daystar Orchestra, as it were, is like a mixture of many things. You know, like very, very, it's like what you call a collage.
Or sandwich.
Yes, many things. And I'll explain. The Daystar Orchestra, yes, you have the orchestra, the standard orchestra, standard instrument instrument members of the orchestra. This is violin, viola, cello, double bass, clarinet, oboe, bassoon, trombones, euphonium, blah blah blah, kettle drum, timpani, blah blah, and all that. Yes, you have that. But along with that orchestra, this European orchestra would play the standard band.
Yeah.
And it's a big band. It's a big band of, where you have, of course, like 3 keyboards, the bass guitar, the rhythm guitar.
Okay.
Then they have their own set of horns.
Yes.
Trumpets, trombones, saxophones.
The big band, of
yes,
course,
they have their own set of horns, which are not part of this orchestra.
Western orchestra.
Yes, they have that. So they have like 3 keyboards.
3 keyboards, yeah.
They have the bass guitar. They have the rhythm guitar. You have an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
Okay. Then they have their horns, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of them. Yeah. Okay. That will play for that occasion. Yeah. Okay. And then all the percussions, the drums, the drum sets, the congas, the talking drums.
Yes.
Then apart from this band again, you now have
the African indigenous.
Yes, you now have
the
orchestra.
Yeah.
A full orchestra of batas and dunduns and gongons and sakara omele. There'll be like maybe 15 of them.
15 of them. Okay.
So, and for many of the presentations, many of the songs, these 3 groups will play together.
That's my point now.
They will play together.
Yeah.
So, looking at that as an orchestra, as an orchestrator in here in Lagos, Nigeria, with the soundscape that the average Lagosian have in their heads, you want to do your orchestration that will match that. And in reality, apart from this Western orchestra now, those bands, and then of course you now have the 400-man choir.
400-man
yes,
choir. Wow.
I forgot to mention that.
As part of that.
Yes.
Yeah, soundscape.
So you have the Western orchestra, you have the the big band containing all the band instruments in their masses, and they will get more hands
Definitely.
for that. Then you have the African orchestra, bata, dundun, like 3 or 4 master drummers, and all their accompanying instruments, the omeles,
Of course.
omele
Sakara,
shaju, omele keyin,
omele,
yes, yeah, omele ako, omele abo, all those things, they will be there. Maybe like 10, 12, 15 of them. And then you have the 400 man choir,
Wow.
which will have been more if they don't skim it down. If they don't skim it down, they'll be like 1,500.
Wow.
I'm telling you, yes. So the orchestra has to play with all this. Now, of course, naturally, the orchestra that will match even any one of those other groups should be like 100-man orchestra, at least, yes. But here we would only have maybe like 35 at the most.
Yeah.
So you want to do your orchestration that would match with that. And Hallelujah Ogo ni Fọlọ́run, for example, is a typical presentation, rendition that would feature all these
instruments,
all these four different ensembles.
Yeah.
The orchestra, the Western Orchestra, the choir of 400 people, the band, the big band of maybe like 15 of them or 20 of them, and then the African ensemble, the African instruments, African percussion, that even without miking them, they can take off the roof, the roof off.
Definitely.
So, Hallelujah Ogo, the Fumbaba, is a typical rendition that would contain all of them, all of this.
Definitely.
So, arranging, orchestrating for this kind of thing can be very, very challenging.
How?
In terms of the fact that, in terms of sound, in terms of the decibel levels, the batas and tuntuns, okay, that is the African percussion drums, they are very loud.
Definitely.
One or two bata, or one bata, one tundu can swallow the 35-man orchestra.
Wow.
Very, very easily. And then you would have like 15 of them all together.
Wow.
Yes. And then you have the 400-man choir, and then you have the big band. So it's a lot of times it's very challenging, playing with them, but we get by.
But as a composer, as a writer, writing for these interesting and fascinating, diverse, complex groups,
Yes.
how have you been able to manage and still making sense within that context and speaking broadly to diverse audience, still within the language of orchestration?
Well, like I said, looking at this scenario, as an orchestrator, you want to do something. You don't want to make your orchestration too complex.
Okay.
In terms of orchestration, or you don't want to make your orchestration too dainty, too finest. Because to start with, you are thinking of the decibel in terms of the amount of sound that these other groups are going to generate.
Okay.
So one of the ways in which I would use to ameliorate for the orchestra to be able to at least balance up, I would use a lot of unisons.
Okay.
You understand? The orchestra will play, they will play in a lot of unisons, so that, to reinforce what the orchestra is playing at any point in time, when they play in unison, of course, it is reinforced, aside from, it's not that one does not do complex, sophisticated orchestration, but you want to, for those kind of things, especially Hallelujah or Goni Fumbaba, for example, it will have very noisy parts.
Yeah.
Although some of those noisy parts, the orchestra will not play, but then even some noisy parts, the orchestra will play. So the way in which one would cover up, make sure that the orchestra is heard, is to do a lot of unison, a lot of them playing same notes, across the registers.
Okay, there's a question here. can we listen to the performance of Enle Alaja? That's from the Toluranti.
Okay, I can send a link. I think let me check my phone. I can send a link. Let me see if I have the.
I mean, you said, can we play it here for him to, so we can also contribute to the power?
Although I have a recording of it, which is just recording alone, no video.
Okay,
I have that here. If you don't mind that,
of course, of course,
we could play that. You know.
Will it get to them? That's the question.
No. Do you have
Yeah.
Okay. What I was trying to send to. Let me see if I can send it to you on WhatsApp. Let me see.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay. So if you want to see performances, of course. So just a moment, we'll play excerpt from this.
Let me send this. I'm sending this to you on WhatsApp.
So we'll just end with that. Yeah, I like that. Okay.
Have you gotten it? In your WhatsApp.
Enle Alaja. You have it?
Hmm? Okay. I think it's there now.
Okay, just a moment, we'll get there.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll get there shortly.
That's it.
Just a moment, we'll get there.
and so on and so forth.
So at this point, we would like to open for our friends and colleagues online. Yeah, so the conversation has been on. So at this point, I am sure you have questions, you have things to, contribute, or you want clarifications on ideas. Please ask questions. You can use um, the Zoom platform. Just raise your hand, and we'll invite you to ask your question. Okay, if you have questions, you are welcome to do so. Okay. Is there any hand raised? Yeah. Okay. Yes, let's have you. Adeolu Abe, thank you. Yes, kindly unmute yourself, please. Abe Adeolu. Okay. Kindly unmute yourself and ask question.
Hello. Yeah, I think I've done that. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, please?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, all right. I sincerely want to salute the effort of our professional in this from a distance, over there. So I appreciate what you do, sir. I have just, how do you think we can establish the
Okay, I think the internet connection is quite, so we can't hear you clearly.
Nigerian kind of symphony orchestra we know and some other forms of orchestra. But I'm asking if you want to create a cliche, a pattern for that and have that established. Secondly, what do you see as the future of orchestration in Nigeria? We, at one point or the other, as musicians, we are trained in sort a way, in a kind of ways that we learned something, but I would say they are not sufficient to, to take us too far. I'm sorry to use that word. I once listened to Emilaka Tabu, which I later learned that you wrote the orchestration. And as a Nigerian who wrote such magnificent work, I keep wondering, when are we going to get here, on a larger scale? So what's the future of orchestration in Nigeria? And finally, are your doors open for training? I desired this a long time. In fact, I collected your number to contact you for one-on-one training. So, but this is an opportunity to ask, are your doors open for training? Thank you very much.
Okay, before Mr. Seun responds to your question, we miss parts of your question. The first question, could you please type that, or you want to quickly paraphrase that again so we can respond to that?
All right, thank you. The first question, how can we experience type of orchestra? We know, you were explaining for example, the example of Daystar Orchestra that combined, like three forms of instrumental music: the big band, the regular orchestra, and the African orchestra. Me, I want to see that as a form of Nigerianness in, orchestra formation. How can we establish uniqueness in Nigerian form of orchestra, of orchestration? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. I'm sure.
Okay, first of all, starting from this first one, how can you establish a unique Nigerian orchestra? Well, I would say for me that's the question kind of answers itself, in the sense that looking at us here as Africans in this location, we naturally do not do the same things. We don't hear the same music that a man in Oxford or Brooklyn or or some other part of Vienna or Paris or whatever. We have our own musics, all sorts of it. Yes, there are there are musics that cross, that is music that cross us, meaning that there are some music that they listen to that we also listen to. But then those ones they are there. There's a whole gamut of musics that we listen to that they don't listen to, and vice versa. So, and I think that once we can make use these forms for us, this music that we have access to, okay, that we are exposed to, which they are not, they naturally form resources for us to use in our own, orchestration, and then of course also our own life experiences is different from theirs. What's the way they are experiencing life there is a little bit different from the way we are experiencing life here. I mean, Alaja, for example, is born out of my own experience of, things that I had seen, that I have experienced, from my youth days, growing up with these experiences, with these songs, people singing these songs at, at those occasions, and of course, it's not only Islamic occasions that I have exposure. I have exposures to all sorts of things, wedding songs at Owambe, Owambe songs at wedding parties and so on and so forth. So I think all these, unique experiences, the uniqueness of our society here, form a lot of fuel, a lot of resources that we can use, and naturally will just make our music different from our orchestration different from what you can have someone from New York or Paris or Melbourne or something orchestrate. At the beginning of this seminar, I said something. What makes African music, art music, African? One of the things that make African art music African is the situation, the place, the situation in which it is being made. If you're an African who grew up, especially one who grew up here in Africa, having gone through all the experiences, musical and non-musical, that you go through, there's a tendency for you to compose music that is naturally African, and that's, I mentioned that as one of the elements, one of the characteristics that make African art music unique to Africa, Similarly, if you're a Chinese who has grown up in China, who has had the experiences of, having listened to, grown up with Chinese traditional music and folk songs and folk tunes and so on and so forth, naturally, it's for me, it's a natural thing for you to lean on all those resources and compose things that are relevant to that location. Same thing with us here. So, I mean, all these, elements are there, all these resources of our songs and our experiences, our unique experiences, they are there. They are here for us to make our orchestration unique to us. And then also our audiences. You also want to look at what your audience. I mean, if you are writing orchestration for a church program, for a church, maybe it's a concert or a carol service or something. Of course, you want to look at the audience. What kind of audience do you have in that church? So you want to tailor some, at least you want to orchestrate, to write something that at least the majority of them, at least you want to write a good amount of music that at least they would be able to identify with. You don't want to write music that they'll be, shockingly disconnected with. So I hope I've been able to at least address some of your the first question. What is the
second one is if you are open for personal training.
Well, if you have my number, you can call me, and then maybe we can meet sometime, and if possible, fix some, maybe one lesson in 2 weeks or one lesson in a month. Yes, I'm open to some form of mentorship. I may not be able to be teaching you maybe once every week or twice every week. I mean, that may not be possible due to my time schedules, but at least we should be able to see like maybe once in 2 weeks or once in a month, in which I'll give you assignments or you show me what you have done, and then I look at it and give you suggestions as to what I think. Like Schoenberg will say, composition is not something you can teach, but some of the elements you can at least teach.
Okay. Now, thank you so much. Do we have other questions? Please, you can use the Zoom app. Just raise your hand and I'll invite you. Perhaps you have questions, follow-up ideas, and other ideas you would like to
I think there was a third question.
The Nigerian sound. Is this the Nigerian sound bringing things together? Yeah. I think you address everything.
Okay, okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Kolawole, let's have you. Mr. Kolawole, let's have it.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Am I heard? I am
Hello,
not sure
Mr. Kolawole.
if you can hear me. Yeah, I'm on, but I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Hello? Oh dear. Can you hear me?
Okay.
I am not sure my audio.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay. We can't hear you yet. Okay.
Is he speaking?
I think it's
Someone
speaking.
can hear me, but
we
it
can't
seems
hear
I'm
you yet.
not reaching out to everybody else.
We can hear you.
They can hear him online.
Is there, but my voice is not reaching through to Urban House, is it? I know someone can hear me. Someone said they can hear me, but I want to make sure that I am properly heard.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Mr.
But
Kolawole.
I am quite loud here, and my network is very strong. Great. So I'll go on. Yeah, Dr. YJ, I've actually heard a lot about you, and I've been looking forward to a time when we'll be able to engage one-on-one. So this is a very good opportunity, and I appreciate your work. Your explanation, your exposure is quite appreciated. Now, my question leans towards the first question that the first respondent asked, and your response to it as well. I think he was asking something like how we can establish the uniqueness or the Nigerianness in the orchestral work. And part of your response, if I could quote you, says it, what happens to what we call African arts music, or how we identify it, is based on the situation, under the situation it is being made. Yeah, but as a person, personally, I am always inclined to actively critique and resist colonial legacy in education, in publishing, in storytelling, to advocate for policies that recognize and reward indigenous knowledge systems. Now, what I want to say might take a little while, but I just have to express this. As you're speaking, I was listening very attentively, and I had the part, I missed it a little bit, the part where you were talking about having as so much butter section in an orchestra, for instance. And when you are going to listen to your music, to your composition, I was waiting for something like that. I was waiting for that kind of a scenario environment, but I couldn't find anything like that actually speak to me as a Nigerian, as an African. All I hear are the media through which the composition was played, was performed, is it's not what I was expecting. And for the sake of our identity, for the sake of our cultural preservation and global engagement, as African scholars, should we not be telling our stories through indigenous frameworks rather than from Western sensibilities? I mean, these sensibilities which sometimes clash with our traditions that value oral transmission, communal identity, cyclical narratives as opposed to Western linearity, individualism, or universalism in storytelling and scholarship. I mean, by asking this question, I do not mean to undermine the fact that adopting Western modes of expression may provide access to global platform for greater visibility of our narratives. However, this is leading to a risk of distortion or oversimplification of our stories to fit a Western framework. I am weary of cultural dilution, that is over-reliance on Western methodologies, which is leading to the gradual erasure or misrepresentation of African worldviews. The danger of epistemic dependence reinforces the notion that Western frameworks are the default or superior medium for storytelling and scholarship. This is what is causing us to internalize colonial hierarchies, perpetuating the nagging colonial mindset where we, as African scholars, now feel compelled to validate our work through Western standards. Should we find a way to use Western tools to critique and deconstruct colonial legacy that will effectively turn those tools against their origin? I mean, we have such abundant indigenous materials to tackle the narratives. Africa is rich in oral tradition, in proverbs, in folk tales, music, dance, visual arts, and spirituality. These mediums are not only effective, but deeply authentic in narrating African experience. For example, the Yoruba Itan, the oral history, the Igbo Mbari arts, the Hausa Wakamata, the women's songs. They're all inherently suited to expressing African realities. Even philosophical frameworks like the Ubuntu of South Africa, communalism and cyclic time can guide narratives in ways that reflect indigenous epistemologies without external mediation. I mean, see how colonial legacy have disrupted many of our African traditions, leading to loss of knowledge and marginalization of our indigenous method. I want to make a claim. I want to make a case for reclamation, which is that we, as African scholars, we should not only champion methodologies that reflect cultural heritage and epistemology, but we should do so through indigenous media, which includes privileging oral tradition, languages and instruments, and communal knowledge systems in academic and artistic expressions, employing narrative structures of African folk tales or performing scholarship through storytellings and song. I am not saying that we should ditch Western sensibilities wholesale. But I am saying there is a need for balance. We can hybridize methodologies to create something uniquely African, yet globally relevant. An example is Chinua Achebe's novels, which use English while remaining deeply rooted in Igbo culture and storytelling. We find a musical parallel to this in our academic institutions. Institutional biases already favor Western paradigms, which makes it harder for African methodologies to gain legitimacy or recognition. And we operate within a system that is dominated by Western standard. So there is a need for systemic change to enable this shift. Western methodologies have their place in global engagement. We as African scholars must champion and innovate indigenous frameworks to ensure cultural preservation and autonomy. Our stories are best told in our own voices through means that resonate with our unique worldview. I am looking forward to a time when we can adopt Western tools for African purposes without compromising the cultural authenticity using indigenous media from our direct heritage. I mean, when I listen to talks such as this is the kind of, this is the way I always want to respond. I am, like I said, initially, I'm always inclined to critique actively and, resist colonial legacy in education and publishing, etc. Yeah,
Okay.
this is what I want to contribute.
Okay. Do you want to say anything, any response to that? So, Mr. Kola, thanks so much, Mr. Kolawale. Do you want to tell any response to that?
Yes. Well, he has said a lot of things, and thank you for bearing your mind on what you think the direction of African art music should go. The issue of African art music is a very, very contentious one, and I have the opinion. I think that some of these issues of, okay, this is what African art music should be or should not be. I personally think that some of those discussions are as engaging as engaging as they seem, as interesting and engaging as they seem. I think it's a little bit too late for us to be saying, okay, this is direction that where African art music. It's a very, very multifaceted world that we are living in now, right now.
Yeah.
And there are too many things outside of our control, and change is inevitable. Very, very, that's the only thing that is constant in this life. No matter how much we advocate for this, or we pitch in the polar opposites tent and say, no, it shouldn't be that, it should be this. No matter what, people will still do what they will do, because, of course, it's a very, very, and we live in a world, it's not like 300 years ago where if a culture is established in this place, it's just this place that in which it would be for a very long time. The world is a global village now. With all our God knows where you are speaking from, sir.
Yeah.
From New York.
UK.
You are speaking there in UK, and I'm here in Lagos, sitting down and listening to you. So these things that promote, that make us to be able to communicate,
Transnationally.
Yes, it's like they are two-edged. It's a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
It has its positives. The positive is the fact that, yes, you are sitting there in UK speaking and I'm hearing you, and vice versa. The negative is that whatever it is that you spew out, whether good or bad, the whole world will see it, and some people will latch onto it, and there really isn't much you can do about it. So, regardless of what I cherish your ideology, sir. But I want us to remind ourselves of the fact that regardless of the ideology of what we think, where African music, what we should be doing or shouldn't be doing with it, people will still do what they will do. And that leads me into the fact that, well, Enlealaja, for example, is one of my compositions. There's a reason why you didn't have, bata or dudu, or, in that particular, yes, in that particular composition, this one that you had, is that, well, at the point in time that I was composing it, the orchestra that I was composing it for, which was, that the orchestra that performed it at that time was Vesta Orchestra. They have their limitations in terms of manpower. Okay, and of course I had to cut, whatever it is that, I had ideas beyond even what you heard, which I had to just kind of limit. Say, okay, look, this is what is available for now, which was one of the things that I talked about. That, see, you want to look at your environment. You want to look at your environment to tailor what it is that you are dishing out. You're not in a cocoon. You are not in an attic.
Isolation, yeah.
Yes, you are not one genius in an attic that's just doing his own thing like that. You also want to look at what is available. What will the people, the people that you are composing for, this concert, this audience, what are the things, some of the things that, so you want to find a balance. It's always a tricky balance, but you want to find a balance between doing what you want to do as an artist or as a researcher, and also this, balancing it with what people have there. So, I have some other compositions that make use even more of African instruments than Western instruments. For example, I'll mention one or two. Groove for the master drummer, for example, has dundun, has omiliako, ishaju, has omiliako and omiliabo, and then has dundun, and then has a singer, singing, of course, indigenous things. And then so the only Western instrument, in quotes, in that ensemble is the piano. Okay, is the piano. And then also coming back to Enlealaja is not a story, is not a folk tale. It is a story that I contrived myself. Okay. Yes, it's a story that I contrived myself. Although using the song Barika Areo, Barika Are. So I basically used that song, the sensibility of that song, the traditional sensibility of that song, to contrive a story that weaves around the song. So it's actually not a folk tale like that. Now, lastly, before I maybe Ayo says what he wants to say, is that in the midst of all this, I still take comfort in the fact that there are young people doing very, very indigenous things. If you go on YouTube now, you see all sorts of young people doing all sorts of chants, Ewi and Ijala and all sorts of things. And they're very, very, I have some of them saved on my hard drives, that I listen to from time to time, that I listen to these young people doing these things. And they do it so proficiently. And I'm enthralled that, wow, this is good. And I'm encouraged, So while we would have a lot of our urban children not being able to speak a lot of Yoruba, okay, and we are beating ourselves that, we should encourage our children to speak Yoruba. In the interlands, and not even so far into the interlands, you have children who are speaking Yoruba very, very, original Yoruba, and they are even doing Ewi and Ijala and all these things. So I still take comfort in that fact, sir.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's have Dr. Oloranti.
Yeah. I didn't know initially. I was like, how do you respond to all this? But I guess Mr. Kolawole has kind of given me some sort of the much required energy to plunge into this. Of course, Mr. Kolawole on a lot of things, especially things that relate to IKS. Now, let me just establish one thing. We live in a free world, and we are all products of our experiences. And we can create music any way, we can take any route. And even the fact that Bach and Handel lived about the same time, and theoretically they were connected, but they were just different, and that is fine, So, and from that angle, I was just going to implore my friend Seun Owoaje that what you're doing is very great. It is extremely creative. It's fantastic,
Thank you.
But I want to implore you. That at the same time consider the use of an African orchestra to tell and promote African stories. Just consider it. It's very strange to me that I want to tell an African story and I'm using a European idiom to tell the story. You're going to lose a lot of the elements of the story you want to tell, no matter what. Except if we just want to continue telling our stories as African slaves and colonized minds. Let us look at Wole Soyinka. It's beautiful when you read the King and the Jewel, written in beautiful English. Very nice, very beautiful, But you can't compare that to the same story written in the Yoruba language, the works of J.F. Odunjo. Let us look at Yoruba folk opera, Obakoso, Obaloaye. These are operas that tell African stories using African forces all the way. The vocal delivery, the instrumentation, everything. Now imagine telling that Obakoso with European instruments, with an European orchestra. You'll probably not find Obakoso where it is in America, where they hold it so high because they think this is something that represents Africa. Oladele was simply told an African story using African forces. So please, stories. And the question is, who are you telling the story to? And that's another thing. It's fair enough. Akiba said, look, all of us, we are writing to please the Western world. He said it. That probably if you want to think of an authentic African art music culture, we should be thinking about people in the village and how to interact with them. So let's consider this. Now the next thing I was going to say was this concept of orchestra. And let me share an experience with you. So many years ago, in the mid-90s, in one church, at the church, an Anglican church where I was in Ibadan, we had a new provost. And he said it's going to be a new season, that for the first time in that cathedral, we're going to have an orchestra. We were all excited because we had two organs, a big pipe organ, digital organ, piano, and because this provost, he schooled in America. And indeed, the following Sunday, an orchestra came. An orchestra of Bata, Dundun, Tagu, Omele, Shekere. And all of us were like, is this an orchestra? This is not an orchestra. And 20 years after that, I repented and I'm like, yes, it's an orchestra. It's not just, it just fits into the notion of what we think an orchestra is. Now, let us note something. The common practice era is so big in the history of art music. And that was the time we were colonized. And then we are kind of locked into this idea of European orchestra. And we teach orchestration, we study orchestration from that angle. But the truth of the matter is that even in the West now, the notion of orchestra has changed. It's something else. The notion of orchestra is the kind of thing you describe that you have at Daystar, which is now strange. The other time I went for a festival, in Spain, there was this piece of music with orchestra where they had synthesizers on laptop orchestra. People were creating new sounds, and it was all sorts of some timbral exploration that was going on. It was an orchestra. I mean, it's not even the kind of thing you want to teach anywhere anyway. So this notion of orchestra should be something that come out from our immediate society. It's just for us to understand how to handle it. I mean, you touched upon that, on how to orchestrate in this seemingly chaotic environment. Now, incidentally, this even our notion of European orchestra does not work in Nigeria. Don't let us fool ourselves. Because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the facility, we don't have the hall, we don't have the acoustics, because all this, the orchestra is an acoustic instrument. If we want to go by how the West will train you to orchestrate, you are looking at the relationships, the sonic relationships, acoustic relationships within instruments, when you are doubling, when you are doing unison, when you are combining colors. If you go by the textbook approach of orchestration and you orchestrate in Nigeria, it's not going to work. So this notion of doing European orchestra is not working for us. I remember for so many years, apostolic faith, they would have to augment, amplify the brass section to have a balance. And the result is not the same. So let's not deceive ourselves about all these things. Then the last thing I want to say, which I totally and completely disagree with you, is this notion of, it is too late in the day to change direction in terms of African art music. And that people will still do what they want to do and things like that. Let us imbibe, let us really dwell on what is happening in the West. It was, there was the world order during the common practice era. And then things started falling apart from the time of Schoenberg. Just Schoenberg, Berg, Webern, they changed the world order. After that, there was a reaction to them. There was a reaction. And then people were saying, no, we don't want to do this again. Yes, that's true. People will not do exactly. There was the need to destroy tonality, and they destroyed it. Down the lane, just in the last 10 years, what happened in America? In academia, in composition world, they started moving in another direction, all about timbral exploration, not thinking about pitch. And it keeps going on. It keeps going on. The West, they keep reinventing the wheel. That's the truth. Even Cameron Carpenter, a new organ has been built for him that is not like any organ that we play right now. In terms of the range of the instrument, it's not even wider. And it's doing its thing. Do you get it? So we don't need, and the funny thing is that all these things are happening. These are things that are happening. It is only when they market it back to us in Africa that we embrace it. It's happening, it's happening. This is happening. Whereas we too, we can do our own thing in our own corner, embrace indigenous knowledge system that we've lost as a result of our colonial experience. There's nothing wrong with it. John Cage and his lots, they are big now in the industry. How did they start? They were just meeting uptown New York. That's all. Drink coffee, and that's it. So, and although, it wasn't so much of, we want to reinvent the wheel, but they are just doing They had ideas, theoretical ideas, and they followed them through. It's not too late for us in Africa to do the same. And it's something that is continuous. They're doing it. They're still doing it. They're still doing it. The whole idea of art music is evolving. It's never been stagnant. It keeps evolving. The next time you go for a contemporary art music festival, you'll be shocked. Okay, this is where we are now. This is a new idea now. And also, we'll be shooting ourselves in the leg. It's fatalistic for us to think in Africa that it's too late in the day. And look at what Yuba wrote in his definitive book. He says the future of this industry is in the concept of creative musicology. For us to go to traditional Africa, live there, go and try and understand. There's still a lot for us to unearth. And finally on this, on talking about stories, one thing we fail to realize is this, which I teach my students. Composition is theoretical. Art music composition. I mean, when you're talking about it, it's difficult to define what art music is. Art music is a lot of things, but one overarching thing is that there's a theoretical framework. Beyond whether you can score the music or you don't score it, there's something that is very theoretical. And the first layer of theory when you're composing is instrumentation. The piano, because it has 8 notes, it is tuned in a specific way. Theoretically, you are locked into that. And your composition theoretically cannot get out of that. And that is where some people like Nkete are coming from, like people are coming from, that if really you want to tell the African story, start using African instruments, because it locks you into a corner where you have to now be very creative. I mean, writing for the Western piano is different from writing from the Imbira. And then the point is, as composers, you must be able to make sense out of anything. Anything. You know. So if we want to really tell African stories, let's tell it the African way. There's nothing wrong in doing it in the intercultural way. That's as a result of who we are, as a result of the fact that we want to relate to the outer world, as a result of economic reasons as well. That's fine. But we'll keep losing a lot of ourselves, a lot of our culture, a lot of even musical components that these are Western brothers. They will come back, pick up, rebrand, and sell back to us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. You want to respond to that quickly then before?
Thank you, Dr. Lunati, for most of the things that you have said. Sometimes I'll say that, some of these things that look as if we are disagreeing, for me, there really is no disagreement per se. I mean, there's hardly anything that you have said that I fault, in what you have said. I mean, the things that you have said. But basically, I just want to make a point that, see, for these compositions, I think I've said it like once or twice already, that, see, when you're actually composing for, a certain medium, a certain, orchestra, that orchestra has a composition. There are things that they have and there are things that they do not have. I mean, I have other, compositions in which I have made use of a lot of African instruments. So I just want to thank you, again, for all your contribution, and, of course, make it known that, well, yes, I basically agree with a lot of things, that you have said. But to me, it seems like we are just basically saying the same thing. Well, maybe you don't look at it like that, but to me, it's like we are saying the same things from slightly different angles, from slightly different perspectives. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Yes, we are at that point again, that usual spot of dilemma in most cases. We can even call it contention or tension, where we start thinking of, okay, what is Africa? In fact, to even talk about Africa, what is this African thing indeed? We are at that point again. And another layer to that is also, during Mr. Shenwa explained in most cases today that its composition is geared towards people, trying to reach out to people, reaching out to people. A question is also, who are these people? What is their what are they looking out for? You spoke about your precompositional
Considerations, yes.
Who are they? People coming to church. The question is, the people we are writing for. Okay, let's say tomorrow I wake up, I want to compose orchestra, and I bring all the bata, the agogo, and everything together. Where can I take it to now? Beyond the university experimental stage platform. Can I take it to can I take it to anywhere? Or I'm talking about audience engagement now. So that's another dilemma. On the other hand, if I write like the day starting, people will, they can see. So it puts us, or composers, scholars, in an interesting corner, which is also a corner that will often spark another layer of creativity, because we start asking ourselves, okay, who am I writing for? If I write in this mode, would they listen to me? If I write in this way, would they listen to what I'm saying? If I write in this way. So it is, of course, it's an open-ended question, yet unproblematic one. Because if we talk about, okay, let's follow the modern trend, then there's a caveat. You are living the tradition. How do we preserve the tradition? Then if we go back, okay, let's do the tradition, pure focus on the tradition. There's another caveat. Are we still living in 200 years ago? So then the question, the other layer is what defines us now? What defines the soundscape? And how should we go about it? I must be sincere with us. These questions are not in one way or the other fixed. No, they are not. They are always in progress. They are incomplete. And that is why we are having this kind of conversation. I am not sure there is a one way to it, and that's why we scholars, composers, we need your help to help us think, get into this process and start thinking about, okay, how do we respond to this interesting but very, very, very complex reality of ours today? Yes, we want to write for indigenous instruments. The question of the people that we are even talking about, the Africans we're talking about, can they still relate with this idea of African that we are talking about? That's another layer to the question. So these are all questions I'm bringing on the table today for us to further consider. Perhaps the next presentation, we are going to have a kind of follow-up. We might even bring Dr. Laurent is here now. We can invite him to come and cap this particular challenge, because it's a dilemma now. Yeah, and he himself and others have said the identity, the condition that we find ourselves now is not unproblematic and uncomplex. It's a complex one indeed, because it's a multiple identity, like the Africanist Ali Masri explained. He said African is a multiple identity space, and that is one of the reality of that word is what we are going to write now. So he said it in the 80s, Ali Masri, a scholar. But right now we are still facing that reality. So it's a multiple identity. We have the indigenous, we have the contemporary, we have the avant-garde, we have different. Even the Western is part of what we call our identity now. Because go to some churches, what we hear is typical Mozart. That's what they see as music, and they are all Africans, So this is where we are now. Thank you, everyone. I'm sure we are going to. Can
I quickly
Please, yes.
add something? While I was giving my view on the direction of African art music, I dare to let me make reference to a certain interview that I had with Kofi Agau.
Okay.
Some years back. I asked him this question.
Okay.
And guess what his answer was? He said, really and truly, in fact, I have it on tape. Okay. I recorded it, and I've even transcribed it, okay, into paper. That he really doesn't see any clear direction in terms of, okay, this is the way we must go. And say, look, this thing is like this conversation. In fact, it was almost as if he was basically saying the same thing that I was thinking. It's like this conversation is too late. Not too late but perhaps he was looking at it from the fact that, well, in the case of the Europeans, if you look at the common period, common practice era, that things formulated progressively, systematically in Europe. Definitely. And then there's a new trend comes, and then over time, the whole of Europe, or nearly the whole of Europe, will just basically latch onto that trend, and then they'll move on, and it goes on and on. So, but that happened then because of the way the world was configured then, because of the communicative
enlightenment,
yes, and all that. But at this time that we are, for us to be saying, okay, this is the way. Now, fine, of course, anybody can have his own opinion in terms of, okay, this is the way this thing should go. This is the way. Fine. I mean, I'm not against anybody having that, but it's a little bit. It's going to be very, very difficult for us to have a homogeneous idea in terms of direction, in the same way like the Europeans have it. You understand? Well, maybe that's the way we are thinking, maybe not. So I'm thinking that I just remembered now that I had that conversation with Kofi Agao, and basically that was what he said. Something else that I want to stress on now is, now, yes, we can say, okay, yes, use African instruments to tell African stories and all that and all that. Nothing wrong with it. But just like what you have said now, who the audience, which audience are we looking at exactly? I mean, if you take it to the village, if you go to the village and you say, okay, you want to use African instruments to tell African stories, it's like you are giving them the same thing that they've known. Okay, now if you want to come back, if you want to come to this, to come to the urban space, are you going to readily find, an audience that is going to, that is going to, to listen to that? We often mention this statement. Say, who cares who listens? Okay. Yes, the John Cages came, the Stockhausens and Schoenbergs and so on and so forth. They came, they did their thing. And of course, they have their place in the roll of honor for doing their thing. But as an African art music practitioner here in Africa, in Lagos, Nigeria, you want to look at the kind of thing that you want to present to a particular audience. Yeah. And in Lea Laja, for example, when I wrote it, it was designed for a particular orchestra playing to a particular audience. Yeah. And that music was basically designed to appeal to that, to that audience.
Wow. Okay, I think we have to run today and we'll close for the day. Wow. It's been a long journey. Let's have a run please. Okay, then we go. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, to react to those 2 points. Look, the way the technology was deployed 100 years ago is not the way technology is being deployed right now.
Yeah.
I think it's probably fatalistic for us to start thinking of, Western music evolved in this particular way, in a systematic way. And then we want to talk about that at this age. No, we can't. Number one, these are two different worlds. They have a system of documentation. We don't even have a system of documentation. And in the world of engineering, we always say that, there are different solution pathways. The most important thing is to define the problem and find a way around that problem. That's it. The way we solve this problem right now cannot and should not even follow the way Western music evolved. We're even different people. Our cultures are different. Even the music content, different. So this is one of the biggest problems we have. We keep making the Western system our standard. We keep looking at how they developed, and then we want to think of ourselves that no, it's not going to happen. We have to evolve on our own terms. We have to get our own results on our own terms. And then that's final bits, that which audience are we going to, if you want to go the route of indigenous knowledge system, where's the audience? Let us face it. Even this music and Laja that you have written is not going to be well received, even in the urban areas, in some sectors. A lot of music that I think is okay, is appealing to me, would not be appealing to people in the cities or even the village or anywhere in the world. That's the truth. And this is something we continue to tell ourselves. I'm lucky. You have an audience and you know their taste, you can compose for them. I mean, a lot of my instrumental works, which have been premiered in Europe and America, I dare not bring them to Nigeria because there's no audience for it. That's the truth. So for each composer, you discover that, music is well received here, it's not well received there. But that shouldn't drive one's creativity. I would never allow that to drive my creativity. If I have a theoretical idea, I want to pursue it for what it is. If it's appreciated, fine. If it's not appreciated, fine. So we cannot say because of reception, hermeneutics, we are going to act, or we are not going to act. We are not going to act. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Oyorante. Thanks to all our friends and colleagues who have contributed to this conversation today. As mentioned earlier, this is an open-ended conversation. We can't finish it in one day. And I'm so happy that we have Mr. Seun Owoaje today. Thank you so much, Mr. Seun. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, of course, as Mr. Kolawole wrote here, this is not so much critique of your remarkable work, but a call to reclaim and safeguard our heritage before it is reappropriated and sold back to us by others. Our goal is to broaden creative expression by encouraging scholar composers to explore hybrid approaches that authentically celebrate our tradition on equal terms. Of course, I agree with you, Mr. Kolawole. So the point then, departure, I think, is to keep it open, and bring more people into this conversation. Let's allow for multiple approaches and see how people, like we are doing here, Organ Out. So the idea is we are creating the conversation. Indirectly or directly, we are passing a message. Whatever is not spoken about dies, doesn't work. But the fact that we are discussing this is a way to start mediating this dilemma. It's a dilemma. Yeah, like Ali Musri wrote, Africa triple heritage. So it is difficult to hint on one and leave the other. And so that's where we are right now. The smart thing, or perhaps which scholars have approached, is to find a way to balance. And that's what I think I found in many of the conversations we are having now. Finding a balance. And that balance itself is not so simple to come by because it takes a lot of work and effort, approaches, different forms of engagement, like what we have had today from Mr. Owoaje. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending this conversation. So, telling African stories is not how like it. It's an open process, like what we've seen in the Oladele Alaja. And of course, like other composition of Mr. Owoaje, the Daystar explorations, there are other forms. You know, we have many layers. And of course, tomorrow we might see another composition that coming with ordinary, just for African instrument. But what is important in this context is to have that story being told, propagated and repropagated across time. So engaging it with all the African multiple heritages, it is what we are mostly opening conversation for. Yeah, not engaging, not telling the stories is a challenge, but engaging it in different ways is our own entry point. Then from that, we can start moving into specifics, which is how to do it. That's another layer of conversation. So today, what we have done is to open this conversation, and hopefully, we can build on this conversation. We can build on it. We can build on it. We can build on it. Even the staff, all the infrastructures we use, they are all so part of Africa, layers of African multiple heritage. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Looking forward to having you next week again on this same platform. And December is a different month, of course. It's going to be, yeah, we have a plan. We'll announce that next week when we get to this session. Mr. Seun, thank you so much for thank you for the wonderful presentation. Thanks for the composition, and thanks for many things you do in this area. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. See you, everyone. See you next week. Thank you so much.